Hello, and welcome to Making Creativity Pay. This podcast is about talking to people in creative fields around promoting, marketing, and monetizing creative work. This episode is with Sean Adams, founder of music website and label Drowned in Sound. We talk about the relaunch of Drowned in Sound as a music label, what a label can offer an artist that they wouldn't get with a DIY approach, the importance of social media in promoting artists, and matching the right channels for the artist and their audience. We also talk about the newly launched Drowned in Sound podcast, where Sean talks to artists and experts in a range of fields from TikTok to AI, and lots more from his extensive experience in the music industry. There's loads of details relating to our discussions in the show notes, with links to the podcasts and some of the artists mentioned in our chat. I started by asking Sean to give a brief intro about his background.
So I'm Sean Adams. I started a music website called Drowned in Sound back in the year 2000. It grew out of an email fanzine I did, which I guess we'd call a newsletter now. It was a blog before the term blog was really in wide circulation, and an online community which allowed lots of music fans to congregate to discuss music without being on the Radiohead forum or the Smashing Pumpkins forum, without the ideology of an artist. It was actually one of the first places I found online where you could have those kind of discussions outside of like news groups, which were around at that turn of the century time. Then it grew into a record label because I kept discovering artists that I loved, that I wanted to work with, and released the debut single by Kaiser Chiefs, Appalachians. Debut album by Martha Wainwright was like our first big release. That sold over 80,000 copies. Then I launched the Quietist website, started managing artists, worked at the BBC for a bit. And as of February 2023, I relaunched Drowned in Sound as a podcast, singles club, and record label. That was more than 30 seconds.
But no, that's fine. No, you've got a lot to get in, to be fair. And obviously, yeah, that's a very skimmed biography. So yeah, with that return, does it feel like a comeback to you?
It feels a bit like when a band split up and then one of the artists puts a solo album out, because Drowned in Sound was always this like group of people kind of co-publishing on a website. It was less of a magazine and more of an outlet in my mind. From a consumer point of view, I think people saw it as an editor and a team of people. So yeah, it's from that side of things, it feels quite different. I've been managing musicians for the last few years alongside doing consultancy work, and I worked at Sick Music for 4 years doing social media and working on things like Glastonbury. And I was still managing musicians a bit alongside all of that, working with an artist called the Anchoress, was the main artist I've been working with, who has collaborated with the Manics, and she was in Simple Minds for a few years. I think it feels like turning something back on again rather than a comeback. I think that's still flickering back into life at the moment, and I'm still finding my feet, finding out where the land lies. The music industry's changed quite a lot in the last 2 years because of COVID. So trying to keep everything on a kind of DIY shoestring when most things feel like they have an insert coins to continue message on them to get most things achieved is quite a unique way of returning to stuff on that from a label point of view.
With the label, it's a lot easier, like you said, to kind of, do things on shoestring, the DIY ethos. It's a lot easier now, probably you'll be able to say a lot better than me, than it was in the past. What do you think a label can offer, both Drowned in Sound and labels in general? What do you think they can still offer artists?
I think one of the big things that labels can do is have a bit more of a bird's eye view than an artist just kind of running at the same wall, hoping to break through it, which is a bit men that stares at goats. But that idea that by working across a few different campaigns, you're going to get a few different perspectives on what can work and what doesn't work. Whereas I think working just as an artist, like, is one of the big things I have quite a big problem with, is when artists only really see their own data, they then kind of carry on doing more of the same thing that's maybe working on Instagram, but actually it's maybe not the best thing they could be posting. It's just performing better than the other things they post. I think algorithms have got a lot. I mean, there's a lot they could be doing as AI technology kind of evolves to kind of say, other artists similar to you are doing these things. Why don't you consider a post like this? And I think that ability to take a step back and to kind of have the artist's best interest, like, it's actually quite interesting doing the podcast, because I spent 4 years helping radio presenters and Six Music kind of build its identity. And I knew quite quickly when I listened to something how to like write a tweet about it, write an Instagram post. And then when it's my own thing, I'm like, oh, how do I do this for myself? Because it feels so different to be talking about yourself in those terms, or to try and engage a community. And it's sometimes quite useful writing in third person as a drowned in sound we rather than in the first person. I think there's something quite nice in that being one step removed. And I think also, like, I've worked with lots of artists out aliases, and I think drowned in sound sort of always been a bit of my alias, because I think that's probably something tied in with ego and brand recognition and all these different things. But yeah, there's definitely some different strands of things going on. So yeah.
In terms of social media and various things, I know one of the episodes you've had was talking about TikTok and the importance of that. So, you've got social media, you've got TikTok, Spotify, YouTube, all these kind of things. I mean, for an artist, where do you even begin? Do you spread yourself thinly? Do you try and find your audience on the platform they use? Do you kind of find them, or do you go for the app that works best in general to go viral and those kind of things? And how do you kind of put all that together?
I think a lot of it's down to experimenting, but pretty much none of the social platforms, apart from maybe YouTube, you could argue, YouTube doesn't feel like a very communal space to exist in as an artist. And the tools are all built for creators, and they're trying to just tell musicians they're creators now too. So I think choosing the right platform is different and difficult for each artist, and how you approach it has to always be within the artist's own tone of voice, playing to their strengths. Like, I'm finding it interesting. Some of the artists I work with have got a lot of things they want to say. Twitter's a really good place to say it, but you don't really pick up much new audience. But what you often find is, for instance, the Anchoress commented on the Taylor Swift songwriting stuff last year. I think her tweet reached like 500,000 people and got picked up by Rolling Stone and the NME and all sorts of places, which brought in an audience in a different way. And whereas working with Faith, who's the Faux Faux, like, she was a photographer before she was a musician, and she's taking all these amazing self-portraits. They're not selfies. They are setting her camera up and lighting up and kind of expressing as the feeling and sensation that goes with her music, and kind of nudging and pushing her into making TikToks just feels counterintuitive. But she loves Pinterest. So it's like, how can we approach Pinterest as a social platform to find an audience is like one of our missions for the next few weeks. And like, perhaps she makes TikToks about her Pinterest boards, and that feels a lot easier for her to do because she's curated a series of images and ideas that go together in a coherent manner. So I think a lot of it comes down to, like I said a second ago, about figuring out the right strategy for your own thing is quite hard. So I think, again, like a label and a manager can be that external force. It's also why, like, some artists are amazing at self-producing, and some you can tell that they needed that, even someone just to bounce off whose taste they trust. So I think a lot of these things are interconnected, and I think the signal to noise is now harder than ever, and the platforms and the media ecosystem and the social media ecosystem, none of it is built for creating a fan base and keeping in touch with a fan base beyond building an audience, hoping 10% of them join the mailing list and hoping that 10% of the mailing list people buy stuff. It's quite a weird funnel, and I don't think any of it is healthy. I think there's a lot of musicians chasing data. I think there's a lot of media that's chasing clicks. And I don't think any of that feels wholesome and complete for any of the people doing it. So I'm kind of trying to set up with a flag in a very different island and trying to create a bit of an outpost again, because I think that was what Drowned in Sound did really well. The forums always felt like a bar at the end of the earth, and the editorial always tried doing things other people weren't doing. So when everyone said we were going to die when MySpace took off, we started doing a top 8 feature where our writers would jump through top 8s and find 8 new artists they really love. And you'd get a selection of 8 acts to check out by going on this pathway through top 8s. When SoundCloud took off, we ran a Tumblr blog that just pulled out the best of SoundCloud and found an audience that way. When Spotify took off, I started writing for their official blog. And so I think adapting to the platforms is going to be one of the things that's going to be quite interesting. And I'm sort of with the podcast at the moment, finding the foundations again before I start to build. So lots of the interviews, like the interview about TikTok, wasn't really about TikTok being great, which I know wasn't what you meant, and I'm not being pedantic, but it was very much about how to be yourself on the platform and how to find your voice. And I think it's very easy for a lot of people to copy what they're seeing, but not understanding the things that they see and the things they like, that they can actually take an influence from it in the same way. So I think it's finding a way to express yourself through the medium is one of the biggest challenges.
Like you said, it's a very data heavy world now. how is that for artists and their kind of, well, for want of a better way of saying it, their kind of mental well-being to, you know how many Spotify streams you have, you know how many likes you've had on a tweet, you know how many people have subscribed to your YouTube channel, everything's quantified 24/7, and you could drive yourself crazy looking at that information, trying to boost it. Is it hard to kind of just say, well, I'll do some work promoting it, I'll do my day job with the music, and I won't let the numbers bother me? But that must be very difficult.
It's really difficult, and it's really difficult for someone working with them and someone that's, it was like difficult for me stepping away from doing something like Six Music where everything you posted got hundreds and hundreds of replies. So I think the data itself, I think there is a lot to be said for artists approaching everything with a purpose. And I think that's been one of the big things I found over the last few years is once you've got that purpose set for a project and once you've got a goal in mind that's about serving the work and not about kind of gamifying the platform, I think it becomes much, much easier for an artist to kind of step back and go, well, actually what I wanted was my music to resonate with these sorts of people. And looking in the comments, I can see that it's resonating with these sorts of people. Or like with the Anchoress last album, we really set out to have a public conversation about grief and the different phases of it and the different elements that happen around something like that. And to, at the same time, set up as an artist that the critics were fans of, not just getting media coverage, but finding actual, genuine, true fans. And I think once you've got someone locked in as a fan and hopefully they're in a position of influence and usefulness too, and because you're putting out music you believe in and you hope other people believe in it too, then as someone that's always put being a fan first, finding fans has been the thing that for me is like such a key central thing that in the music industry feels quite lost.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the difficult thing with music and Spotify and their playlists, where obviously their aim is to just keep you listening. So it's better to have a stream of, pardon the pun, 6, 7 out of 10 songs, in terms of rating, the kind of song that, that's all right. It's kind of in your wheelhouse, rather than a couple of 2s and a couple of 9s. You might think, my God, what the hell is this? Or this is your new big thing. It's, they don't want to risk giving you that 2 out of 10 song, the 2 out of 10 for your, in your opinion. They will generally keep it safe. And so, yes, it's kind of harder to have risks, I think.
And it's things like, I remember when Phil Taggart played Baby Metal on Daytime Radio 1. And I don't know if you know who Baby Metal are. They're kind of heavy, but not. They now headline Wembley Arena. And I'm not saying that was all down to Phil playing them on Daytime Radio 1, but the fact that he did and it confused and confounded people and it sounded nothing like anything else, that to me is where humans can do something which an AI DJ is not going to be able to do. And I think looking at all the discourse around ChatGPT at the moment, it's like, it's a powerful assistant if you know what you want it to do and you know how to pass the information it gives you back. But a lot of what it gives you is a guesstimated kind of simulacrum ghost of information that it believes is the correct thing that you wanted. Like there's a lot that this technology is not capable of that humans are. And a lot of that is down to our ability to contextualize and surprise. And I think we've had a decade now of being essentially served a Last FM playlist. And Last FM was great. It went through the music you listened to and made you a playlist just like Discover Weekly. And if you want more of the same, that's great. But if you're at a starting point where you don't even know what you like and you've not fed in the random things that you've discovered, you've just carried on pressing play and leaving it to play. Some of my favorite records took me 5 listens to even begin to appreciate them, but it was the only thing I had and I was listening to it and really wanted to understand what the journalists talked about when they put the music into context, or the artist that I love decided they wanted to put them as a support band and I was going to go see them play in a support slot in a few weeks. So I thought I should really listen to them, and like they often turn out to be your favorite things because you crack it and you start to appreciate it a bit.
With the label, like you said, I think the first episode of the podcast and the first artist you're working with on the label is the Faux Faux. How did that come about?
I loved Pins. They played some Drown and Sound gigs over the years. Faith was the lead singer of the band Pins. They're kind of a punk gang from Manchester, I used to call them. And they put 3 albums out. They had Iggy Pop sing on one of their tunes, and Faith sung on Iggy Pop's last record on the James Bond track. People recognize that one. And I chatted to Faith actually when Iggy played at Maida Vale for Six Music, and we just started chatting on Instagram for a bit afterwards. And then during lockdown, I think it was, she mentioned that she might start working on some solo stuff. And I said, well, I'd love to hear it when it's ready. And she sent it and I was blown away by it. So quite natural, I guess, way of discovering something from an existing artist. And I guess in a way, some of the artists I've worked with over the years, like the Kaiser Chiefs were previously Parvo, and that was like their new iteration. And some other artists I work with have like changed their names and done a different run at their career. And I think a lot of the time, like solo projects, you often start to discover that the artist behind the band was kind of one driving force. Or so I've always thought what Faith was doing was great. And I remember seeing her play the main stage of Reading one year and just thinking, how are they not like one of the biggest bands on earth? And so she's made like an amazing video. She started sending me some new things she's working on. So it's very early. Like she's not even played a show yet as this project. I put the track out in February, and it's had thousands of plays on YouTube already, and lots of people are telling me they love it. So that feels like a very good start to the project.
Yeah, it's interesting you say she used to be a photographer. She's got a photography background. When you can see the video, obviously she's in most of it, but I'd imagine she's had a heavy part in kind of how it looks.
Yeah, it's like a love letter to the Northeast, and it's actually shot on 500-foot of film. She found a director she really liked, and so it's quite a special thing. There's also in the not the outtake of photos from the day, she bumped into one of the guys from the Drifters, and she found out all this history of the hotel it was shot in, and that some famous artists had played there back in the 60s and 70s, and which wasn't what they were expecting when they booked the room for 20 minutes to film in it. And so it's really nice.
So with that, how important do you think things like a video are?
I think that a world building and building a world is essential to most artists. I think music doesn't exist in a vacuum, and I think the visual language is really important. That said, I don't think the era of the 50 to 100 grand music video is ever going to come back. And I've never spent more than a couple of $1,000 on a music video over the last 20 years. In fact, the most expensive video I ever spent on never even got released because the artist didn't like it. So, but I think finding a visual aesthetic is really important. And I think that we exist on quite visual platforms as well. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the music video. It needs to be I'm always surprised when artists don't have a visual identity or much of an interest in it. They're probably not going to be artists that I'm going to be that interested in and into. So there's lots of different ways of doing it without spending a lot, especially considering when we didn't make this video on an iPhone, but you can now shoot in 8K with a device in your pocket if you know how to use it. The
overall aim of the podcast is to kind of talk to people in creative industries about keeping the lights on, keeping the plates spinning, about how you can kind of make a living out of it, even if it's not necessarily, big bucks, but you can kind of get by and keep doing the art effectively. So, within music, it's kind of sometimes hard to find where that is. You make the music to put on Spotify to get the streams, which generate next to no money. So you can then go on tour, which is tight, to maybe sell some merch, which again is getting tight. From a very basic point of view, if you said, how does a musician make any money? Would be the direct way of asking that question, I guess.
Well, I think if you flip the question around, who values music? Big brands do. Movie syncs, those people pay a lot to use the right music to fit the right mood to sell their products or to fit a scene. So I think that is a tough world to get into but it's also, for some artists, it's not been. There's some quite small artists that make quite good money out of songs they released 20 years ago being used on movies and things. So that's one area where I think there's quite a lucrative amount of money. There's the live industry. Once you reach a certain level, there's good money because it's not just the ticket sales and the merch sales. It's also your performing rights payments, which every time your song is performed, you receive a royalty for your song being performed. So if you write a song and it gets millions of artists covering it, that's also really good for you. But it's not huge songs, but if you play a festival, collecting that money is quite good because it's based on the total attendance of the festival. So the base level can be an extra 180 quid or something like that for some artists. Can be a lot more. Then I think that there is all the creator economy stuff where you could run a Twitch channel and have tips and TikTok lives and YouTube pre-rolls on explainer videos. But I think for a lot of artists that doesn't serve what they want to create and who they are and what they're creating for. But if you're the kind of artist that would be in a wedding covers band at the weekend and make your music the rest of the time, or rather than do another job that's not music, I think if you actually look at a lot of the artists from the last decade, a lot of them are also record producers or collaborate on other people's songs or have their other products and things they make, or they have day jobs for 9 months of the year and they're musicians 3 months of the year. So I think I would definitely not advise anyone to quit their day job and put 10 grand of their own money into music and believe that they'll be one of the lucky ones, because they could be, but in reality, £10,000 isn't enough to break an artist anymore when you're competing with somewhere in the realm of 100,000 tracks a week. A lot of that's being generated by AI and not just other people picking up their instruments and learning to record their instruments and learning to write and structure and compose a song and all the things that should be valued by every music consumer. And I think Bandcamp's really important because people are collecting the files and supporting the artists in that way. So with the Anchoress, we do quite well from a small amount of her fans purchasing lots of different things she releases on there. So, but I think it's different for every artist. And I think that some artists can scale and get notoriety, which they can then pivot into fashion or pivot into TV or other things like that. Or I don't know, they could become political journalists. I don't know what they might do off the back of their notoriety and reach. So yeah, I think there's no silver bullet, and I don't think I really answered the question, which is...
Well, no, I mean, if there was a silver bullet, yeah, you'd be off making millions off it. Yeah, it's never easy. From your experience of working with artists, how comfortable are they? It's a generalization, I know. How comfortable are they asking for money? Does that feel as if, they will produce something, and if people like it, they like it. But that terms of, pushing the merch, does that feel, it's difficult, it's where kind of art and commerce meet, and whether for some it feels a bit beneath the art almost, I don't know.
I've always found it surprising, the artists that are good at it, and surprising, I feel like it's completely awkward asking for money. But for instance, when Drown and Sound needs to do fundraisers, I read a few different guides and they were like, well, don't ask for money. Ask people to buy a pint to put in the server, because it sounds strange. And it's like, well, you would, if you spend enough time somewhere, you wouldn't begrudge buying someone a pint as a thank you. So, and then the price of the pint was obviously like about £5. So it meant that people were making that kind of level of donation, which was amazing, because 300-400 people doing that meant that we could carry on kind of covering all of our bills. For a lot of artists, I think they understand that they need to ask. But for instance, that video of Matty from 1975 about meet and greets, I thought was brilliant. The idea that some artists are charging their fans hundreds of pounds to do a meet and greet. And Matty was like, if you can look someone in the eye and take £20 off them for a selfie, you're tougher, made of something tougher than I am. If you have to physically take the cash out of their hand, like running a merch stall at shows, I think some artists learn quite quickly that actually fans like the fact there's an excuse to meet the artist. Don't begrudge handing over the money because they know that it's covering costs of things. But then it's completely different working, I work with Charlotte Church, and making merch and things like that feels like it's all got to be done in the right way and not just to make money. I'm not going to earn my commission unless she does things like that, but it's treating it in the right way and considering who she is, people's preconceptions of how much money she might have. So their idea of supporting the artist is a bit different. Yeah. So it's and I think a lot of those things have become, I find Patreon quite a weird concept of asking your fans to pay for access to you or pay for access to kind of exclusives. And it's not because I think it's a bad idea or a bad concept. I just don't think it feels as, for one, some artists end up super serving 70 fans, which again is not the best use of their time.
Yeah.
When they might have 100,000 fans. But it also just feels like you can't set the price point based on how much someone can afford. Yeah. So I think it's music is art, and we put the same price on everything. My biggest bugbear in the music industry was that the greatest albums of all time were always 3 for £10. Yeah. And you're trying to sell a new record for £12 to £15. Obviously that's in the CD era, but in the CD era, you were also spending £5,000 to have your CD rack to the front of the shop so that people could find it and buy it. And it's was that better than not getting on the homepage of Spotify? I don't know. It's what amount of money do you need to spending on marketing so that you can be considered for the homepage of all these platforms. So yeah, I think in a world where everything is given the same value and everything is aligned in a database and a cell in a database, lumping music into the creator economy and putting it on the same level as a 5-second TikTok or a 1,000-word blog or the greatest film of all time feels like we're losing something, and very few people are concerned about that. And like that to me is the big thing. Like my mission with the podcast that I'm working on is to really help people understand and appreciate the value of music, because I think music appreciation is obviously something which gets you into music in the first place.
The way I kind of see it on Spotify, there's too much of a gap between you listening to something and liking it and then being able to interact. I mean, you can go into the artist profile, they might have a Twitter link, which you then have to take outside. You may then go to their website and sign up for their email. It seems like it's too many steps. So I think Spotify could do a lot more, kind of open it out a bit. If you listen to a song and you think, yeah, I want to hear more from that person, you could just click a button and, Spotify could police it. You don't have to give the information out. But then you kind of open a channel effectively between the artist and the user. I think there's all sorts of things that could be done there, but I think Spotify are very much kind of, it's within their control and they want to hold as much of that as possible.
So many artists I like release records and I don't even know they're out. And like, it's heartbreaking because like I follow them on every platform, don't see their posts, probably follow them on Spotify too, and I don't see anything. Like that's a broken system. Like for instance, with Faith, like her band Pins have a decent following. We've literally got to like either run loads of posts on the Pins accounts, which doesn't necessarily feel like the smartest way of doing things. We've got no way of connecting to the people that previously listened to Pins on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. I know Spotify is the really easy one to talk about because they're the one with the most open data.
Yeah.
But YouTube is a huge platform. And even if you want to take out an advert on there, it's really complicated. It's not even easy to give them your money to have a simple result. Like there are intermediaries that make lots of money off the back of people not being able to understand these complex platforms. And again, like there's any number of people charging $1,000 for a course to basically ramp up things so the Spotify algorithm boosts your music, or the YouTube algorithm, or the TikTok algorithm. It's like you shouldn't need to pay a third party a £300 retainer to spend £2,000 of your money in order to take out an advert. Like you should be able to spend 50 quid, see if it was impactful, to reach the exact kind of people you want to reach in a way that doesn't feel like an advert. So I just think a lot of these things are so broken, and like the amount of artists that I've forgotten about that I absolutely adore. Now I don't feel like I ever hear anything that I've not heard before, and that kind of worries me. But it's also like Tidal was meant to be built by artists for artists, and I've not really seen, like actually I think it sounds a lot better as a platform, and I don't know whether some of that is a placebo effect, but it definitely sounded when I've A-B'd stuff a lot better. Deezer as a platform has some really simple functions, like you can do a promoted play thing, and I think it was like £150 or something. But it just stuck your song on autoplay to the sorts of people it thought would like it. One of the biggest challenges is artists actually working out who their complementary fan bases are and whether those fan bases are interested in finding newer things.
Yeah, that must be quite difficult because you kind of want to be, you're your own artist, you're your own person. You don't want to say, oh, I'm like whoever, but obviously there will be similarities.
Well, it's like the Anchoress trying to connect to the Maddox audience is really hard because they're not as kind of, they are still predominantly, I'd assume, a CD buying kind of audience that spend 15 minutes a day at the most online. They're not like at the top end, like the super fans all know who she is. She did 300 shows with Simple Minds. There's no real easy way of reaching that audience. But musically, we've done ads promoting to Fiona Apple fans. Didn't really, it's such a big pocket of audience. It's so hard to like know whether it's going to connect on the small amounts we're spending. Trying to connect to Father John Misty and John Grant fans, who I think are the perfect audience. But again, like, are you targeting someone that likes one Father John Misty song, or someone that's a diehard fan and doesn't really listen to anything else? Like, there's no real way of, like, we're meant to have these sophisticated ad platforms. As it currently stands, they're not even very sophisticated social platforms. So,
yeah. And
I think when you consider the amount of money that's spent, the amount of money that's made, I know what you can do for almost no money with tech, and the way in which Twitter's kind of imploded. And there was a huge amount of people working across Twitter, and people are building new platforms quickly.
Just a quick question on kind of, you mentioned ChatGPT, AI in general. So there's so much that can be artificially created, and where you think the good and bad is in that. I know that could be that could be a PhD, never mind a 5-minute chat on a podcast.
So I like the fact that AI can augment things, by which I mean summarize, quickly kind of like put things at my fingertips that are quite specific. So I wouldn't let it make a decision for me, but I might make it give me some options. And like, I say make it like it's some sort of slave, but it's just a piece of technology. The way people are humanizing it, I'm finding quite interesting and strange, which was what happened with the first times they built technology a bit like this as well. I think from what I've read over the years, there was like something to do with when CBT therapy first came out. It was through people just having their answers repeated back to themselves on a computer. It's in one of the Adam Curtis documentaries. Anyway, I'm not answering the question. I think that there is a lot of diminishing our concept of what's smart and what's intelligent when we let a computer respond to something. There's a great Jaron Lanier quote. He's one of the inventors of VR, and he talked about how smartphones aren't that smart. We just dumb ourselves down when we look at them. And being impressed by the idea that a calculator can do French is not that impressive, really, when you consider that all it's doing is putting two databases together and giving you 3. So I think understanding what it is, I'm still pretty wowed by it and the different things it can do, and what Runway can do to re-edit video footage in a different style, and the speed at which you can now cut out an image without having to spend ages chopping around it in Photoshop. And there's lots of things where I can see that AI is going to be good, but I think there's a lot that can be lost in amongst all that when you consider marketing for the last 20 to 30 years has all been about the storytelling behind a brand, the story behind a product, the story behind a piece of music. I love what Holly Herndon's done with Holly Plus, where they have created a echo essentially of her voice. It's a deep fake essentially, but I quite like the idea that it's like this digital echo, because when you sing using it, it sounds like Holly Herndon. And I think that's technically AI, but I'm not even really sure whether it's essentially, I'm sure it's all using data sets to do some sort of translation.
Yes.
But is it just the Babel fish?
That kind of stuff is amazing. And, I said on a previous episode, we were talking around copyright and, this whole kind of David Guetta with his AI Eminem, that's because the input is probably breaking copyright, then there's a problem. But if you had an Eminem, if you were someone kind of pretending to be Eminem, an Eminem impersonator as the training set, then you could effectively create something that sounds like Eminem that's never been anywhere near Eminem. And so legally, as long as you don't market it as Eminem, you could just have it as, white rap dude. You could do what you want.
One of the big things people fear, and I think quite rightly, is where's the consent in that of essentially creating a fake Eminem? Obviously you can go out, and many people have gone out and completely pillaged someone else's art and passed it off as their own. People have made entire careers off of just doing something that someone else has done in a different key. So I think that it's worth considering that with this technology becomes a responsibility of the people creating it, but also the people using it, because my one big that takes away my fear is people's lack of imagination that's going to make AI not that exciting. Because if all you can do is recreate things from the past and mash together two different things that don't necessarily mean that they're meant to go together, then it's just postmodernism. It's not actually creating anything new. It's just creating remixes of the past. And I think we have to be thoughtful. And I think that we are taking our hands off of the wheel a little bit and expecting the technology to be able to do things which if it does something where there's no real value to it, then I think it's, for instance, someone was saying it can do summaries of sports games and it's already being used for that kind of task, or your local weather, and what it would do, it will go to 3 different weather sites and kind of aggregate them and make an average. What it can't do is go out and sell a weather vane and put in the training data of knowing the local weather patterns. All of those things are all going to take humans having a better view. And sometimes just seeing a cow laying down might be a better sign than what all the forecasters say. And the podcast, I've got some interesting guests line up trying to do a series on misogyny in the music industry and actually trying to figure out why men aren't talking about it. I've got a long wish list of musicians I want to chat to for the podcast. Some I've interviewed before, some I've always wanted to chat to. So it's a good excuse. I'm also just like trying to figure out how I can use the podcast to do short form and longer form kind of things. Like I really love what Tortoise has been doing with podcasts and journalism. But I also really like the idea of just doing a voice note. And like I'm talking to a friend that's a music therapist about how we could do a series that's kind of, because I'm treating the whole thing like a magazine rather than like a podcast. So not every episode's going to be the same.
Yeah.
And I think it was Tortoise I heard use the term audio publication. So I really like the idea of it being like a magazine where you might tune in for a big name interview and then the next week it's some topic that just like reading a column in a newspaper. So yeah, so I kind of like, I'm setting myself a challenge of trying to do something a bit pioneering, but I'm trying to just stick to one episode a week and some vague connected themes. I'm really keen to talk about the environmental impact of music. And there's some really great experts to talk to about that. Anyway, that was probably a much longer answer.
No.
Which I think was the theme of this podcast.
No, it's been great. No, it's been really, really good to talk to you. Yeah, I think we could probably have done a podcast on, drowned in sound and online blogging, message boards, communities, another one on, the kind of new label, another one on, music, another one on merch. Yeah, good tools. But so,
I mean, just ask me about the value of music and I could just talk for like 5 episodes.
No, it's really good because a lot of the previous ones have been with comedians. And so it's kind of interesting to kind of talk to them and kind of how they see things and how musicians work. And, there's lots of similarities in that. An awful lot of the time, a lot of what you're doing doesn't generate revenue itself. It's all about trying to get to the next level. So, if you're a comedian, you're maybe doing, several either open mic or slots where there's 6 comedians on the bill and the entry fees are £5. And you think, well, how much are they taking? They're probably taking 50 quid, if that, for it, so it's just to kind of hone their act and build. And so, a lot of the time you kind of think, like in music, there's lots of people making money in the industry as a whole, but the people who actually do the work are probably, the bottom of the food chain, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, that's the biggest problem with almost every industry at the moment, the grassroots where the value is created because comedians have to get their confidence and learn their skills. And there's a lot of people that are not making really any money by developing those talents. When I first saw NFTs, I thought, well, actually, maybe this is the way of cutting someone in for their support early on to receive a kind of dividend on the kind of success that they've helped fund.
Yeah.
And like with Kickstarter and things like that, I always thought maybe that's like, I got really, really interested in band stocks about 2008, 2009. And band stocks was a platform that allowed you to buy a share. So if you pre-ordered the album, you got 1 share in the album. And if the album sold over a certain amount, you got £1 back. And if it sold over more, you got £2 back. And a lot of the time, I nearly did a couple of projects, but you could basically put that money back into another project rather than cash out, which I think was an interesting way of thinking about and also all those people got to go to like an album launch and they got to feel part of something. And one of my biggest criticisms of the last 20 years of music is that Radiohead collected all that data on In Rainbows and not a single one of those people have been contacted about another piece of music, I don't think. I'm sure they've been contacted about Radiohead tours. I bet they don't even get emails to say there's a new Phil Selway album out. So I think when you consider the millions and millions of people that they can connect to and that they could have built a platform like Bandcamp off the back of doing that kind of pay what you can model, there's a lot of artists in very fortunate positions that don't put their money back into the ecosystem and don't build the resources in platforms. Like people build a lot of stuff for themselves, which every artist needs. Like Cash Music was an amazing platform because they essentially created open source tools for artists. So I think there's a lot of, I hate the term gatekeeping, but there's a lot of things that could have communal or mutual benefit. And that's a lot of what I'm thinking about is what the label is. It's about creating that kind of communal set of tools.
Thanks for listening. Details about Sean and Drowned in Sound, along with links to a number of areas discussed in the podcast, are in the show notes. If you enjoyed this, check out our previous episodes, which have discussions with writers, comedians, and podcasters about making creativity pay.